What's up YouTube, Capital G here doing a boom or bust. This time we're talking Psi-Frames in this video, and I haven't done a boom or bust in a while. So for those of you who don't know what boom or bust is, it's essentially where I talk about one of the newer archetypes that has been released in the game. I give you guys my overall opinions on the deck, tell you how it plays, give you some backstory if there is any, because sometimes these are like dual terminal archetypes. Talk about some of the positives and the benefits of the deck. If there are any negatives, I discuss that too, and then I give you guys like an overall impression and like an overall like feeling of how competitive I believe that the deck can be. So first off, Psi-Frames are a synchro based light psychic deck. They were released in High Speed Riders, so the deck is only like a month old. It's still a relatively brand new deck to the game, and the deck's playstyle is very similar to Artifacts. It's I would say it's most comparable to that, because the deck essentially revolves around summoning your monsters during your opponent's turn and then making counter plays to whatever your opponent does. It's very similar to, I called Necros this at one point, kind of like it's like a counter puncher in boxing. None of your Psi-Frames can essentially be like normal summon. They all have to be summoned by card effects, but it's cool because they all activate from the hand, and then when they summon themselves, they summon a buddy. They summon this vanilla, which you do have to run 3 of. It kind of sucks when you draw it, but I'll talk about how you can mitigate that. The thing about it is, when you summon these guys, a lot of times they will negate a card effect and they will actually destroy that card. So you end up blowing something up on your opponent's side of the field. You end up summoning 2 monsters, and then it goes through the roof if you have Psi-Frame Circuit, as you're able to synchro summon during your opponent's turn too. Now, if you don't have Psi-Frame Circuit and you don't synchro summon, then your opponent, your monsters essentially they get banished, but that's actually not the worst thing in the world either. So let's just talk about some of the monsters and how they act. Each monster essentially, and they're all named after the Greek alphabet, just a little fun trivia there, but they all basically shut down, or they summon themselves when your opponent does a specific action. It could be summoning a monster, it could be actually trying to activate a monster effect, trying to activate a spell or attack you directly. I mean, these are very common things. These are not things that aren't going to happen every single turn. You summon them, and then essentially, you try and snowball that into your synchro summons and then try and win the game from there. Here's a fun fact that a lot of people don't realize, that if you summon something like Beta and then you happen to bring along his buddy Driver on the field, your opponent cannot bottomless. They cannot torrential tribute. It's a ruling. Essentially, the last thing to happen is not them being summoned. It's your opponent's card actually being negated. So it does give them a nice little resistance to things like, TT and bottomless, where your opponent could, they could potentially wreck your play. Now, essentially, this all is a means to the end, and the end is obviously Psi-Frame Omega. This deck does have its own synchro summon monsters. It's kind of like Satellite, where you don't have to actually allot that much space to these monsters, because one, if they happen to die, they can just put themselves back into your extra deck, which is it's really neat. Like, you never run out of these guys. And 2, it just leaves you a lot more space, because you can run a whole bunch of other cool synchro cards, including Backrow Dragon, which again you can summon during your opponent's turn, potentially blow their field up. That used to be something that was it used to only be exclusive to like Yang Zing, but now this deck can do it too if you happen to have the this card. Now, when you get your monsters out like Omega, which is Omega, quite frankly, is the best Psi-Frame monster. He's the whole effing show, and he's like, there's a reason he's $33. When you get this card out, your opponent really starts raging, because he's resistant to just everything. First off, he has a quick effect. He can banish himself, and he banishes a card in your opponent's hand. You get information because you get to see that card, and then you don't have to deal with that card until your opponent's next turn. Now you think, but I lose my monster. It's no big deal, because being able to use him as a quick effect means that he dodges this card and this card and this card and this card and things like Book of Moon and dodging attacks, and just, it's unbelievable. And then when you get that public information, then you can throw in things like Mind Crush, and you can just Mind Crush your opponent, what your opponent has, because they're you get to see it and they're gonna add it back. Just Mind Crush that shit, and then you can combo Mind Crush when your opponent does all the searching with the Wavering Eyes and the Draco Slayer, etc., etc. Now, the thing about this is, with these summonings, they had to balance it somehow, and the way that they balanced it is, you can't have any monsters on the field to activate these guys' effect, and you have to be able to summon this guy, but this guy can be summoned from the hand, the graveyard, or the freaking deck. So as long as you have 3 of these, it's never going to be a problem. Again, it sucks when you draw it, but you kind of have to run it. It's like Caboozles and Dino Rabbit. So the deck actually runs things like, you may max out on Maxis or Card Ds, Wind Up Rabbit. You want monsters that essentially can provide like some benefit, but don't necessarily have to be on the field. Wind Wind Up Rabbit can banish itself. It also is a really good poke monster, and it's kind of resistant to this, and this. And then things like this, it just, you draw it and you get hand advantage. This deck is also very resistant to OTKs, which are kind of prevalent in decks like Cosmos, because you have your beta, which is kind of just a beta version of something like Valkyris, where this guy, not only is it essentially just like Valkyris, where it ends the battle phase, but it's actually better because it's Sakaretsu armor, except it doesn't target. So I guess it's more like Widespread Ruin. If your opponent has like a spaceship or a Magispector monster, monsters that can't target, you activate this guy, you summon him to the field, you summon his buddy, you blow up their monster, and then potentially you can just, you can just summon this. And it doesn't matter even if you don't like synchro summon, because they can't further their battle phase anyways. Now let's just say worst case scenario, you don't have Psychic Frame Circuit and you just end up having your monsters banished. It's not even that big of a deal, because they have this card Psychic Field Zone, which is, it's essentially a reverse Miracle Fusion. You take two monsters that are banished, two Psi-Frames that are banished, you put them back into the graveyard, and then you synchro summon with those monsters. So it's actually really good. And we talked about, what if you draw too many Psi-Frames? If you max C and your opponent tries to kill you, they go YOLO, which first off is pretty stupid against this deck, because you have this and it's pretty damn hard to stop. But even if you don't have that, you have a card like Psychic Frame Overload. This is what allows this deck to be really good even when you brick. This card essentially says you can banish a face-up Psi-Frame, or you can banish a Psi-Frame from your hand. Again, don't take the Max C challenge against this deck. It won't work out for you. You get to target a card on the field, and you get the banish. Now, even though it does target, this gives the deck Backrow removal, which is really good in a pendulum format. But it also means that it makes it very difficult for your opponent to ever get that monster back. I still haven't actually thought of a way, because the monster is banished face down. That means you can't levier it back. You can't do anything that would summon the monster back, because the game state doesn't recognize the card that is banished as a face, like it doesn't recognize it as a monster. So it's almost impossible to get that monster back. So what have we learned about this deck? We learned that this deck has a lot of counterplays. We learned that it has some of the best synchro monsters in the game. Quite frankly, this and Clearwing Synchro are like arguably the best synchros in the entire game. And we also learned that it's impossible to kind of OTK this deck. Now, what I haven't talked about is the fact that this deck actually has multiple versions. Let's check out the ARG version. This deck actually won an ARG Atlantic City, I believe, about a month ago. I could be wrong about that. Nope. Atlantic City. I'm gonna have both of these videos linked and annotated. That's the decks you guys are looking at. Both of these decks like won an event. So with the Yosenju engine, essentially, not only do you get the removal of something like Combo 1, where you can just bounce problem cards or problem monsters off the field. Oh, you've got Vanities? No, you don't. Bounce it. You know what I mean? But you also get searchability with Comma 3. You also get, a little more offense than a standard version. And you don't ever have to max out on Yosenjus, because why max out on Yosenjus and dead draw them when you can max out on Tenkis, get more attack, and then just search whatever you need specifically. Lose a Turn is also really good in this deck, because it slows, if you don't happen to have Psi-Frame Circuit to crack those pendulum scales, then it can essentially slow decks like Infernoids, decks like Performance Impulse. It slows them down to you, even though you're probably doing counterplays anyway. If your opponent activates Pendulum, I believe that counts as activating a spell, so you should be able to activate something like Delta and blow that Pendulum card up. I could be wrong about that, so don't quote me on that. But with something like Lose a Turn, it does, like, Lose a Turn already works with Yosenjus inherently, but it does give you a little more time, and it doesn't really matter, like, it doesn't matter at all if your Omega comes out in defense mode, because you can just put him in attack mode during your next turn, and then you can activate his effect, and then when you activate his effect, when he's summoned again, or not really summoned, returned, he'll come out in attack mode. And now, there are a lot of quirky combos and plays, like, for instance, when this card is destroyed, you can banish it from the, or when it's in your graveyard. It doesn't have to be destroyed. If it's in your graveyard somehow, you can banish it, and you get the tutor essentially for any Psychic Frame card or Psi-Frame card, just not itself, not another copy of Overload, because that would be broken, which combos perfectly with Omega. Omega has this other little quirky effect where he gets to take a card that's banished, put it back into the graveyard. So essentially, every single turn that you have this and you have this, you basically just +1, like you +1 by just constantly juggling it. Now, you can't use this the same turn that it was sent to the graveyard, but when you put this back in the graveyard with this guy's effect, it doesn't count as being sent to the graveyard. graveyard. It counts as being returned. So you can use it immediately. And if you have 2 of these, you go +2. There's also a little quirky combo where if you have 2 Omegas, you can use one's effect to essentially banish it and the card in your opponent's hand. And then you can use the other's effect to put that card back in your opponent's graveyard, and then it's kind of trapped there forever. It won't return because, you know, it's not banished to return for Psi-Frame Omega's effect. So the deck it's really good. It's really fun. It's really oppressive. It's one of the most frustrating decks I think to play against in the entire game. Very similar to like a deck like Ritual Beast maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And I think that this deck has a ton of untapped potential. It's also worth noting that this is one of the only decks that can gain life points. I wouldn't call it inherently like Cosmos and Forerunner, but you can go into things like Thought Ruler Archfiend, you can go into Fortune Tune, you can go to Ancient Fairy Dragon, which you're gonna play a lot of field spells. This deck happens to run Chicken Game, but you're always gonna run Psi-Frame Circuit, so you can actually get life points back, and I think that it's a really good deck, man. The Synchros never run out because you can constantly return them, so you never really have to run out, or you never have to worry about running out of Synchros. It's practically impossible to OTK this deck, and even when the deck doesn't have much committed to the board, there's still always a lot of plays there because your hand is essentially like, even during your opponent's turn, your hand is always a tangible resource that you can make actions from. So I think the deck is really good. Counter plays or ways to counter the deck, definitely like Mind Drain is the biggest one because you can't do anything. If you activate Mind Drain, none of these cards work, including Maxi, so just have fun with that. Debunk is also good. Spell speed 3, can't activate anything in response to that. And Iron Wall because you won't be able to banish things. You won't be able to essentially use like Omega's effect. You won't be able to use Wind Up Rabbit and whatnot. I feel like there's one other little quirky thing that I'm forgetting to mention, but it's fine. If you guys watch these 2 videos, you'll become very informed on Psi-Frame if you haven't learned enough from watching this video. I'm giving the deck a boom. I don't even care if nobody's playing it. The deck is just, on paper, it's too good and it makes too much advantage. And all the format, like all the matches that I thought, this match shouldn't be that good against Cosmos because they can OTK. No, wait, I got Max C. No, wait, I got Psi-Frame Overload. No, wait, I got Beta. They can't actually OTK me. Well, it shouldn't be good because the Magic Specters, you know, they can't be wait, no, Beta, it doesn't target, and you know what I mean? You can play things like Hot Red Dragon Archfiend, which blows cards up without targeting. So I don't know, man. And I also think that if you summon things like Yazzie against a deck like Magic Specters, like I just think they get fucked like really, really hard. You have this plus a Max C, have fun against that Magic Specters. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching as always.